Hello everyone, welcome back to the main stage here at MagicCon Las Vegas. And I'm very excited for us to be getting underway with our next panel here. I'm glad you've chosen to join us as we get stuck into Memory Deluge, a Pro Tour flashback featuring some of the biggest names that have been involved with Pro Tour broadcasting, coverage, playing in the event, covering these events. And it's going to be fantastic to pick their brains, take a trip down memory lane, share some stories and anecdotes, and have a chat about the grand old institution that is the Pro Tour. I'd like you to join me in welcoming to the stage your host for this event, a man who I'm sure you're very familiar with, the Pro Tour historian, someone to whom I owe a great personal debt of gratitude. He has been a huge influence on me as my time with my time in the Magic community as a broadcaster and as a presenter. So my friends, please put your hands together for the one and only Pro Tour historian, Mr. Brian David Marshall.
Thank you, Riley. Hey, everybody, nice to see you. We're gonna be doing, we're bringing out our panel right now, and I'm really excited to be joined by some titans of the Pro Tour. I'm gonna start with my old partner in the broadcasting booth. He's a Pro Tour champion, and he's a Magic the Gathering Hall of Famer. Gonna bring out the one and only Randy Lightning Helix Buehler. Also joining us on the stage today is another Pro Tour champion and Magic the Gathering Hall of Famer. It is the, you can't spell elves without, LSV. Yep, right there. And then, you know, it's kind of a theme here. We have another Pro Tour champion, another Hall of Famer, someone who loves to attack for two. One of the great limited players in the history of the game, and now a product architect at Wizards of the Coast, Mike Potato Nation Turian. And then, you know, 3 Pro Tour champions, 3 Hall of Famers, and rounding out the panel, someone who, like me, has been to a Pro Tour and has voted for the Hall of Fame, Meghan Magic the Amateur and Good Luck High Five Wolff.
Joining you as a titan of talking about the game.
Yes. So, you know, we're going to talk a little bit about a bunch of different topics. Talk about some of our favorite decks is where we thought we would start. And some of the most dominant decks in history. The Pro Tour for a long time was a place where we would see cards just rise to prominence. And a card that went from ranked as one of the worst cards in a magazine from the set Ice Age became probably one of the most dominant cards starting right at Pro Tour 1, and a card that both you and Mike, Randy, have know quite a bit about, and that's Necropotence. What were the Necropotence decks all about?
Yeah, this card really helped me get to the Pro Tour. Right, this card was dominating the Pro Tour qualifier circuits. The idea is you look at this thing, right, it's pretty innocuous. It's paying life to get cards, and at the time, people are like, if I pay all this life, what do? I don't lose my draw step. People used to think they had to blow it up in order to get their draw step back. People were afraid to pay life. And so it took a couple of years for people to really figure out how to harness the power of this. It turns out, if you just put a bunch of cheap cards in your deck, there was this thing called a mana curve that we were also learning about around the same time. Fill your deck with cheap enough cards, assume you're going to get the skull into play at some point, and yeah, that turned out to be the key to winning the Pro Tour, for me anyway.
And it won things in Standard, but then it became a fixture in Extended, Mike, I think, when you were playing a fair amount of that format.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about Necropotence was, it's like, it was this card that was so incredibly powerful that you would just make decks better by putting it in, right? Like, it's like, oh, there's a donate deck, but you know how to make this deck better? And now it's a Necro donate deck. And all of a sudden that deck just became dominant. And that's just the story of Necropotence was, it's like, here's this card that, you know, for something that costs 3 black mana, you would think, oh, that's really hard to fit into decks. But especially back then, like with Extended and dual lands and whatnot, and Dark Ritual, there were just always ways to find to cast it, and then you got as many cards as you wanted.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about this as, oh, one of the best decks that's ever been on the Pro Tour, like the most powerful cards. The thing is, though, the first Pro Tour it was legal at, it didn't win. That's PT1.
It
right?
won the juniors, though.
And it was there, but sort of in this, still in an embryonic stage. I did manage to win the Pro Tour in Chicago, and I suggested this almost half joking, half being just selfish to be able to talk about this long lost love of my life. But the card gave me this incredible edge at Chicago. And the thing is, honestly, if we are talking about what was the best deck at any given Pro Tour, like I'm sure Callblade's going to come up, right? The Eldrazi deck. Honestly, I think the best deck for any Pro Tour format was the Necro Donate deck that no one had at Pro Tour Chicago 3. It was 100% legal in the format. Nobody found it. The idea of putting this Necropotence card into a combo deck to help you get your combo parts. Oh, and how about Force of Will and a blue card at the same time? That deck was just the best deck in the history of that extended format. I think it was the best deck at the Chicago that Bob Maher winds up winning with his Oath of Druids deck. And nobody had it.
Well, we've been talking about a senior super series. And maybe replaying some of the old Pro Tours.
I'm in.
You're in.
I'm in. Where do I sign up?
Let's talk about another deck that was super powerful, and it really dominated in Rome. And that's Turian Academy, High Tide. This is around the Urza Saga era. I mean, Luis, is this still a little before your time?
This is back when I was watching Pro Tour coverage, watching these guys actually play at Pro Tours and reading about, Kai and Tommy Hovey and all the old greats. And I remember thinking how fun it would be to play in one of those. And then I eventually played in a few.
What made this deck so insane, Randy?
I got to tell you the first time I saw Turian Academy in play, because it literally the day after the Urza Saga pre-release, Andrew Cuneo shows up for playtest. Of course it's Cuneo, right? Anybody who knows Cuneo is not surprised by this story. And so he's like, I got this academy. He's got like Mishra's Baubles and a bunch of cheap artifacts, right? But we don't have the whole spoiler yet, so we don't know what's out there. He's like, what am I going to cast with all this blue mana? It was Mahamodi Jin. It was Turian Academy for Mahamodi Jin. Then we find out, there's this card, Time Spiral. What? I think I'll cast Time Spiral, untap my academy, get more ridiculous amounts of blue mana, and then the version of it that we played at PT Rome would use Stroke of Genius. You would target yourself with Stroke of Genius so that all that blue mana turned into more cards in hand. And then there was this awful enchantment called Mind Over Matter that you could discard those cards, untap the academy, tap it again, and you get 20 cards in your hand, and then untap your academy 19 times. Suddenly you can Stroke of Genius your opponent for just 60, 80, whatever. So you could deck your opponent. And I mean, it was hard to get a turn 1 kill, but turn 2 kills were very, very doable in that format. It was crazy. Definitely a crazy time.
Yeah. Jumping ahead a few years, Ravager Affinity, to me, was the dominant deck. It was a deck that required multiple bans, and we could take a look at some of the cards in that's Arcbound Ravager and Cranial Plating. Now this, to me, Luis, this feels like around where you're getting into the competitive play scene.
Yeah, the first regionals I played at, I played Ravager Affinity, ended up going 9-1-1 to qualify for nationals, missed my flight, didn't play nationals, so that had to wait. But yes, Ravager Affinity was very good.
Can you explain to me how Disciple of the Vault math works if we both have a Disciple in play?
Yeah, this is the first thing I thought of when I saw Disciple of the Vault here right now, is a flashback. So the way it works, you both have Disciple of the Vault. When an artifact goes to the graveyard, both them trigger. What you need to do is if you have the Ravager, you wait till their turn, you sack it, an artifact, their Disciple triggers, your Disciple triggers, you let yours resolve, then you sack a new one before theirs is triggered, and you can actually burn them out with 20 lethal Disciple triggers that they control, never resolving. Magic's moved a little away from that sort of gameplay, but I will say that if you knew how it worked, you had a pretty big advantage.
I do feel like we're going to start moving from Ravager Affinity into a lot of decks that Luis piloted, at Pro Tours here. And one of them is, I remember going to Pro Tour Berlin, and there was a player party before Pro Tour Berlin, and everybody was coming up and being like, hey, don't tell anybody, but do you have any Glimpse of Natures or Nettle Sentinels? It's a secret deck. And how many people would you guess didn't play this deck at Pro Tour Berlin that wanted to?
I'd guess a fair amount. There was a lot of people looking for all those cards, exactly like you said, because this was kind of a meme deck that was on Magic League, and it had a bunch of twin blade slasher type cards and just not good cards. And then all the good teams kind of realized that, hey, if you put all good cards in, you take the bad cards out, this deck's busted. Ended up there was 6 Elves decks in the top 8 of the Pro Tour. I was lucky enough to be one of them. We played it, and it was this weird kind of dynamic where every person you played against in the tournament, if they were playing Elves, they knew how good Elves was. If they weren't playing Elves, they didn't know how good Elves was. So the non-Elves players didn't actually have that much that was even good against Elves. It was crazy how good the deck was for that tournament.
Now, Meghan, you actually go from that scarcity of cards in Berlin. You have an Elf deck.
Yeah, I was telling BDM this story, but I started playing Modern Elves in like 2015 or 2016, and Matej Zadelkai, who got second in Berlin, is a good friend of mine, and he was like, you know what? I don't play these cards anymore. Do you want them? And so I actually have a bunch of the second place Berlin Elves that are just sitting in a Modern Elves deck at my house.
Not good if you need to win the tournament, but pretty good if you want to compete.
Yeah, exactly. They're not first place Elves, but they're solidly second.
So another deck, again, this Luis, I think about this deck as being a big part of like a pivotal change in Magic history, which was the playtesting houses. And when Channel, and Mike and Randy have their experience with playtesting houses way back, but when Channel Fireball sort of brought that tendency back, one of the first decks I really remember coming out of that team was the Clawblade deck, or Claw Go, became, Clawblade, Claw, whatever. But what was going on with that deck, and how did that come about?
It's funny, the Clawblade deck, it not only did Channel Fireball make that deck kind of made the team, Channel Fireball. Like, we were a loose collection of friends hanging out, and we built this deck. I remember Raptor added 2 Stoneforge Mystics to the sideboard of Blue-White, because we saw that this guy, Michael Hetrick, had played it in a Star City Games tournament, and then played a couple games against Kibler, and it was like, whoa, this is actually busted. Stoneforge Mystic for Sword of Body and Mind or Sword of Feast and Famine was just absurdly good. Ended up playing 4 of them, convinced Ben Stark to play the deck in the tournament along with our team. He won the tournament, beating Paul Rietzel in the finals. And after that tournament, we're like, hey, we should just become a team and be a little bit more focused, because we gave the deck to a lot of people. We didn't really worry about secrecy. And afterwards, we're like, hey, we should just actually form a team. So that was actually the first time that Team Channel Fireball was actually a team, even though we had tested together for tournaments before that. And yeah, Clawblade was probably the best deck we've ever made among a bunch of good decks that we made. Yeah,
I mean, and, it was like, I forget how many decks in the top 8, but and if you went to the top 16 of that event in Paris, it was even a bigger percentage.
Yeah, we had something like 7 people in the top 16 playing the deck, which was a very good performance.
Yeah, not a bad showing. Yeah. So a deck that I maybe is not ever the best deck, but is always a great deck, is Jund. What are people's feelings about Jund as an archetype?
It makes me furious. It's been a while since I played a Modern tournament, but if I had to pick one sensation of my opponent playing, a Blood Crypt or something, taking 2, and then casting a Thoughtseize against me, it's just pretty pure rage. Pretty deeply upset about what's going on here.
I mean, as a, someone who's going to these events now and looking for deck techs and trying to find the cool decks and everything like that, Jund was always a little bit of oh, yeah, I'm just playing Jund. Yep. I don't got anything. But this has become, I think, a pretty prevalent archetype even in older formats, which I think is what's kind of remarkable about it to me. What's your experience with the deck? I don't know if you guys have ever really Junded.
To me, it's the Rock. That's the thing that's actually the most remarkable about this archetype is it dates back to literally the 90s. I remember Sol Malka calling this, black-green, what was it, the Rock and his Millions, and the Rock was Phyrexian Plague Lord, and you could sack creatures to the Plague Lord to do things. Squirrel tokens, right, because it was Deranged Hermit to feed the Plague Lord. And I mean, the basic idea of this black-green, very grindy, get ahead a little bit at a time, discard removal, it's been around forever, and it's been good forever. It was never my specific cup of tea. I don't have a lot of experience playing with the deck, but I don't get the rage so much as just I'm impressed by its resilience.
Yeah.
You say impressed, I say deeply frustrated. Like,
Fair.
Let's talk a little bit about Eldrazi. This is another deck Channel Fireball has a dominating tournament with. What was going on with the Eldrazi decks? Meghan, you actually, like, this is a deck you really called out when we were talking about this panel.
I think because for me, you know, I started playing in Return to Ravnica, which was about 2012, I want to say, 2011, 2012. And so we got to hear all of these stories about decks that did really busted things, you know, decks that were head and shoulders above the rest of a Pro Tour field when they hit the scene. But for a lot of the time that I was playing competitive Magic and that I've been playing Magic, there just wasn't a deck like that. So it was hard for us to conceptualize, to be like, what would it mean to go to a Pro Tour and be like, oh, someone here figured it out. And so the first time that at that event, it was like, oh, this is what it feels like to be in this room and be like, oh, someone figured it out. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of people breaking it for a Pro Tour,
yeah,
like that, it might be #1 on that list. Like, did this deck have a bigger edge or Caw-Blade? Those are the two contenders.
I think this deck was actually better.
This is better than Caw-Blade, right? This is the most anyone ever broke it.
So we were teamed with Face to Face. They built the deck as well, like it was the two of us, and we had 10 people in the top 24 playing the deck. Yeah. Like the top 8 had, I think, 5 copies of various Eldrazi decks. So unfortunately for us, the blue-red Eldrazi deck that JC Tao played and his team played was really good against ours. So he actually defeated like me, Shuhai, and Ivan, just demolished us, all of us on the same deck.
Yeah.
So it was a bit of a bloodbath. But I remember the Eldrazi deck not knowing how good it was. Then after 2 rounds of the tournament, when we were like 18-0 or something, all of us, and we're like, yeah, this deck's actually pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly remember being at that event and just like the buzz that starts to spread as like people start to realize what they're up against. People who had, and it blindsided people. It's like Caw-Blade, people knew Jace was good, right? People knew Stoneforge Mystic was good. You guys had the best concoction of it. Or even like, if you go back to the Necro deck or the Academy deck, they weren't complete surprises to such a giant percentage of the field the way the Eldrazi deck was.
I mean, you would sit down. I remember like one of my first rounds, it's like, you know, Eye of Ugin, play 2 Eldrazi Mimics for 0. Next turn, the Eldrazi Temple, Simian Spirit Guide, Reality Smasher attack for 15 on turn 2. And then my opponent's like, I didn't even know any of these cards were good.
They're reading the cards.
Yeah, they're just like, what is going on here? And it's just that, I mean, it actually got turned into Eldrazi Winter. I remember covering Grand Prix Detroit like 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
There was the weekend where there was 3 Grand Prix the same weekend. And there was like something of those 24 decks, it was like 18 or 17 Eldrazi decks or something. It was crazy.
Insane. So we talked a little bit about this idea of playtesting houses. That was when Channel Fireball really changed the way people played on the Pro Tour at that time. But playtesting houses were something that goes back to CMU, right? When you guys were playing?
I think of us more as a playtesting team. Okay. Like, we definitely had a group of guys that would get together, you know, most days in the, you know, the months leading up to the Pro Tour. But the real innovation, I thought, was the way those guys would sequester themselves. Like, for me, it was definitely a change to say, hey, let's just go to the site or, you know, the city a couple of weeks early, you know, hole up in a house somewhere and just do nothing but Magic. Like, we never got to that stage with CMU.
How conscious of a decision was that, like, that you would have an edge over the field with that type of getting used to the time change and just being all in the same place together?
I actually remember one of the earliest playtesting teams I got onto had like Nassif and Herberholtz, a lot of the greats who were playing then, sort of Pro Tour Valencia, the one that got flooded. And it was all like we'd communicate online, play some games of Magic on it. And I remember coming away from it feeling really dissatisfied. Like, this wasn't very organized, this wasn't very effective.
Yep.
No one really communicated that well. I'm like, why don't we just all meet up? Like, we're all friends. This is why we wanted to hang out. And it worked so well that we just kept doing it. I never think that we were like some kind of genius for inventing this. We invented playtesting in person. That's not, you know, it's reinventing the wheel to some degree. But I will agree that no one was doing it, and no one was specifically going like, let's rent a place 2 weeks early in the city that we're going to play in and just get used to the food, get used to the weather, get used to the time zone, and just there's no distractions. Even if you were all at home meeting every day, you still have all your like normal life stuff intruding on that. There, we were kind of cut off and just playing Magic 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day for 2 weeks, and that made us all better at Magic too, not even just whatever format we're talking about.
And that's just the norm now, right? You see that here at World. I mean, even if people are staying at a hotel and not renting a house, but people arrive and it's just the way people play Magic.
It's become a bit of a standard in the sense of if you have a team and you really want to prepare, being all in the same place is really an important part of it.
I mean, it's interestingly, a lot of the best teams in the 90s were just from a city. Right, TM2 was all Pittsburgh-based. Your Move Games is basically all Boston-based, right? It would have a critical mass, you know, Kai's group in Germany were just all living in the same city where they would draft together.
The Cologne Conjurers Circle?
Is that what they call it? CCC, absolutely.
For a World,
nice pull.
For a World, I traveled to Germany. There was a Worlds in Germany, and I traveled and I stayed with Patrick Mello and play tested with Kai and Dirk and Marco of just like, for one, solving the jet lag, always such a big thing.
Yeah.
And then it's just like, great, let's just get together and draft, right, and practice. And it just made, because, I mean, the other big change to me was Magic Online, right? Magic Online meant that, like, okay, now all of a sudden, you didn't rely as much on that city-based model.
Right.
You could actually get together and play and just, you know, jam games. And I know for me, it's like that's what brought, like, CMU and New Jersey, the Target team, together and help us do so well at the Nationals was just, yeah, we can just play Magic Online a lot.
Yeah, it used to be you couldn't get good drafts unless you had a critical mass of people that could like all drive to the same location. Like Magic Online completely changed things. And then, you know, a lot of the testing houses, it's like, okay, everything moved onto the internet because Magic Online, and then you guys brought it back together again.
When you talk about Magic Online, that helped, I think, also globalize the game. Right, and you know, continue to spread it. And I think about, you know, when I think about big events in the history of Magic, I think about Japan becoming this powerhouse in Magic, which, you know, there were always Japanese players on the Pro Tour for a long time, but it really wasn't until Kuroda, going back to Ravager Affinity, you know, wins Pro Tour Kobe, but and then a couple years later, we're at Worlds, and Japan just utterly dominates this, and it really felt like a huge moment in the history of Magic, just in terms of the game's like global reach. That it was, you know, there were great players all over the globe at this point, and people whose names you didn't know were suddenly going to become household names. You know, Kenji Samura and the like. So, I mean, what do you remember from that event?
It's funny for me. Worlds, yes, is clearly the crowning achievement, right? They win the team title, they win the individual title. But for me, the changing of the guard was when it was a Grand Prix where all of a sudden Masashi Oiso, who was probably the best Japanese, like the first truly elite Japanese player, and Kenji Samura showed up at a Grand Prix in Boston. Like, what? Like, not many people traveled for Grand Prix. So, you know, you'd see some of the top Americans would sometimes go to Europe or South America. 2 Japanese players showed up at a Grand Prix in Boston? They're going to take our prize money back to Japan now? What? That was the changing the guard for me.
They were really there for the pro points. Let's be honest.
It still felt like
they were taking those from us too. They were taking right.
Now, yeah, that was the moment for me. It was like, okay, the world just works a little differently now, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I always remember as being a big moment, a historical moment in the game, is Melissa DeTora now working at Wizards of the Coast, breaking through into the top 8, and you know, the first woman to top 8 a Pro Tour. This was a huge deal, and it really, you know, you said blazed a trail for a lot of players.
Yeah,
to talk about what impact that had on you, Mo.
You know, this was also, like, Melissa's top 8 was right at the start of me playing Magic, actually. And so this was a point at which I was not even yet watching Pro Tour coverage, but Maria and I would pull up Melissa's deck tech and just watch Melissa's deck tech multiple times. I didn't even know what a Thragtusk was at the time. And I was just like, this deck, like, this is amazing, and it's specifically amazing to me because I'm getting to see this player who I have not seen represented at that time, like at any FNMs that I was going to, at any drafts that I was going to at my local game store, honestly. And I think, like, a lot of times you look at the way that players either end up going like a casual play route or being competitive players. And I think it's kind of surprising to people sometimes that Maria and I tend to think of ourselves more as like competitive players. We love drafting. Like we're people who want to 3-0 our draft pods. And I think a lot of that is because right at the start when we started playing, we got to see Melissa in that top 8. And it's like, oh, it almost feels like that choice was made for me. Like, I'm not going to be a casual gamer. Like, I'm going to try and be this person.
Right. And then, a couple years later, Autumn Burchett wins the Mythic Championship, which was, that was actually my last event doing coverage. It was kind of like, it just felt like such an amazing moment to see the game growing, to see people breaking new ground in terms of success. And, Autumn was someone whose career I had followed from the first Pro Tour Autumn played in and went 9-1 in Standard. And so it was like such this great moment. What do you remember from that event?
I just remember knowing in the top 8 that Autumn was going to win in the quarterfinals. Just like you watched and like Autumn was locked in and it was like, oh, this is the player who's taking this home. Like there's no one else in this room left who has this drive and this focus at this moment. Yeah. I felt like honestly, as soon as the quarterfinals started and the first match kicked off, it was like, oh, that's the winner.
Right. And we talk about how representation matters. Do you feel like the composition of Magic tournaments has changed since those two
oh my goodness.
Events?
Not to use this as like the milestone or anything, but even just literally yesterday, the first time I went to the bathroom and there were other people in there. Because I used to go to the bathroom at a Grand Prix and it was like a place where you could just be by yourself. You like walk in and you're like, oh dang, it sure is nice and quiet in here. But I would also literally tell people, like I would trade having to wait in line for 15 minutes to not be the only person in here. And so very honestly, that was literally something that struck me yesterday when I walked into the bathroom in the convention hall and I was like, dang, it's hopping in here.
That's awesome. So I wanted to talk about part of, for me, doing coverage, part of the thing that was so appealing to me and getting to travel these events was traveling and seeing the world and going to some. I wanted to find out some of people's favorite locations, and we did a little poll, and Japan was a country that was mentioned a lot. Mike, what do you remember about the first time you went to Japan?
For me, the first time I went to Japan, it was really how much I was traveling with Gary Wise, and both of us are like, 6 feet, bigger guys, and like I was like, oh, we really like stick out here. Like it was just traveling and going around. It was like a very different feeling when it's like, oh, this shower, I'm a little too tall for the shower. This bed, a little, right? And so it was just like, oh, I'm in a different place. But then also like the thing from a Magic sense that really struck out, when an event would start in Japan, like the way that the Japanese players would shuffle was a very different technique, and they would sort of like, I'll say, slap their deck, and so the entire event hall would just like sort of like rattle with the opening shuffle when the round started. And to me, it was like, oh, I'm in a different world now. But yet, when you play, you're still playing Magic. Even I don't speak a word of Japanese, and when I would play against a Japanese player or any player who didn't speak English, it's like, well, we play Magic, so we talk the same language.
Well, one of my favorite cities to go to, I was very jealous, Megan, Barcelona. I was really jealous. That's the one, MagicCon I missed this year. What do you love about Barcelona?
Oh my goodness, I think everything. To me, again, I know we're talking about Magic, but to me, like the Sagrada Familia, which is there, is like, I think the most incredible piece of art I've ever personally laid eyes on. I don't know that in my lifetime I will ever see anything that matches it. It is unbelievable. But also, honestly, you fly in and there's like these gorgeous kind of hills on one side and then the beach is right there. It just feels like a place that's set up to be beautiful and to enjoy being alive in.
For me, it's the food. Cal Pep was one of the best meals I've ever eaten in my life.
Paella is just like Barcelona.
Yeah.
It's just like, that's all I would eat there.
Yeah. Speaking of great food, Paris. You've eaten well in Paris, Luis, in your life?
Well, the first time I went to Paris was for the World Championships in 2006, and it was me, Paul Chion, Ben Lundquist as the U.S. national team. And we were traveling on an extremely small budget, let's just say. So we had some good food and we had some good time, and it was a little stressful because Paris just isn't the cheapest city in the world. So I enjoyed it a lot more my subsequent trips when I was a little bit more established as a both player and an adult, as opposed to like kind of looking like, okay, yeah, we could do this today, but that means tomorrow we're gonna have to, you know. But I will say though, Paris 2006, it was in the Louvre. Like that was just like one of the coolest venues of all time.
Unbelievable.
And I got to say I went to the Louvre, so I didn't actually have to go look at any art. I could tell people like, oh, did you do it sightseeing? Oh yeah, I went to the Louvre. Yeah, I did some money drops there.
I think also one of the great treats doing coverage or playing on the Pro Tour is when you get a free trip to Hawaii.
Absolutely.
Right?
The Pro Tours in Hawaii have been spectacular. For me, again, it's the food. Like the sushi at Sushi Sasabuni, I still have this. It might be my #1 meal of my life at this point. Like, I always think it's a good sign when you go to a restaurant and they don't let you order. They're just like, we're just going to put food in front of you. And this was that kind of sushi place, right? You get the omakase whether you like it or not. And they come out and they're like, okay, you can have soy sauce with this one no soy sauce. Right. They got it figured out. I put one piece of fish in my mouth and it dissolved. I don't understand how this fish could swim in the ocean. Like, it just dissolved instantly. Anyway, yeah, I still remember the meal. I mean, the Pro Tours were fun too, but for me, it's some of the meals on the Pro Tour have been absolutely the highlights.
Yeah.
I have to go back for just a second. I do need to know, did you see the Mona Lisa, or were you like, amazing, really, really great? Do you know what? It's a pretty small painting.
So I've heard.
The Mona Lisa is very small.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of disappointing.
Okay.
One of my favorite Pro Tour venues, not really, Long Beach, probably not the best city I've ever visited for a Pro Tour, but getting to stay on the Queen Mary was pretty spectacular and was like a fixture of the early Pro Tour. And I'm sure Mike and Randy, you guys have.
Yeah, I mean, it was like our Wrigley Field or our Fenway Park. It was just super quirky, kind of old and run down in places, but
talk about little rooms, Mike.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, I mean, like there's these places that you go that are both a part of history, but then also like, you're playing Magic, you're competing, you're trying to win. And like, to me, the Queen Mary had both. When we were in like Madison Square Garden for an event, right? It's just these like, oh, here it is, it's these iconic landmarks, and they all have this like unique feel, right? It's not only a big, it's not just a giant tournament hall. It's just like, oh, okay, here's these nooks and crannies, and oh, by the way, this place is haunted, right? I hope that doesn't make my mana draws bad, right? Like, that's not what the ghosts are fiddling with right now. And so, getting to play in a castle in Germany, right? It's just like, nice. It's another time where it's just like, oh, I remember like the first time I met John Finkel. It's just like, there was this like little like alcove into the castle opening, whatever you want to call it, where we were playing, and he's just like in the corner, like shuffling, talking to himself, like preparing for battle, right? And this was before, I mean, he was John Finkel, but it was before he was Magic's John Finkel.
Yeah, he has one top 8 at this stage.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, it's the reason I knew him and I knew of him. But so to me, it's like this weird like cultural history plus Magic history all blended together.
I think we can't really do a Pro Tour flashback or a Pro Tour discussion without talking about the best players in Magic history. And there's two different, like, I think, ways to look at this, right? There's always a best player right now, right? And Megan, you've had a chance to watch Nate Stoyer quite a bit. Someone who's just at the top of the game.
Yeah, it's really impressive to see someone, like you said, like, you think more about the longevity when you're talking about the greatest player of all time, but talking about just in the last year of play, what does it mean to be the player at the top of the game? Well, it's like, it means winning the World Championship and top 8ing a Pro Tour and then also winning a Pro Tour. It's pretty solid.
Yeah, well, but what do you guys think someone like Nate needs to do to get into the discussion of some of the people we're going to look at as we move along here? And, you get into the big 3, the big 5. Let's start with the German juggernaut, Kai Buda. Like, where, like, how do you even, get into this discussion when you have someone with 7 Pro Tour victories?
I mean, I think you have to differentiate between peak value and career value, in my opinion. This is me showing my like old Bill James baseball historical abstract roots. This was the distinction he really made. But I mean, you could look at.
Might you be interested in talking about a player's peak value?
Maybe, maybe. I mean, Kai is the king of peak value at some level, winning those 7 Pro Tours, and he wins those 7 Pro Tours in like 3 years, right? And then honestly, the way the Kai story works out, Magic Online comes out, and his edge starts to disappear a little bit. Like in the era before Magic Online, he had such tremendous advantage over the entire field. He got to draft all the time. He always had a good deck. And like before Magic Online existed, people would show up without good decks. So just the size of the advantage he had on the field in those years, I think he's still #1 in terms of peak value. There's some good candidates, including Luis right there. Definitely had multiple runs where he was clearly the best player in the game right now, 3 top 8s in a row. Didn't win 7 Pro Tours. I mean, it's hard. Not many of us have, right?
Nobody has.
He still has time.
It's true. But yeah, for me, that's the trick. Like, Kai does have the 7 Pro Tours, but like, if you look at career value, like, John has so many top 8s. Yeah, Paolo has so many top 8s.
Let's take a look
so
at
many
John
wins
here.
that,
Yeah.
like, I think most people, I think, tend to think in terms of career value. It's just like, okay, all the way from beginning to end, were you good the whole way? Well, it's the accumulation of results in the long run, I think, is what most people value, which is where the conversation, I do think, gets more interesting, and where it isn't necessarily Kai.
What's the difference between John and Kai? I mean, obviously, they were for a long time, that was it, right? It was John and Kai. That was the discussion. Yeah. But they feel like such different players.
They are very different Magic players. Honestly, they're me versus Mike. Like, it's intuition versus hard work, right? I have always been jealous of Mike's ability to just instantly diagnose a board state and understand. Even he's never been in it before. Like, for years, Mike's primary strategy was to make the limited board complicated. Because he's like, if I could just make this a mess and play with cards nobody else plays with, they won't be able to figure out what to do, and I will. He was just always, I mean, that's who Finkel is, right? He just doesn't need to practice. I mean, when he was practicing, he was absurdly talented. But even when he didn't practice, he would just show up in top 8 of Pro Tour sometimes, right? He, for me, was always the guy you would put against the aliens if you were playing for the fate of the universe, because it doesn't matter what the format is. John's intuition for the game was that good. But Kai was very much more of the hard work guy, right? He was, especially for that run where he won all the Pro Tours, he was just constantly, every day, every week, putting in hours and hours and hours of playing Magic. And I don't know that one of those is better than the other. Like, they both work just fine.
Yeah, I remember traveling to an event with Kai. We were flying, and like he was practicing like before we took off. Like and then I fall asleep. I'm asleep for hours. I wake up, and he's still just going, right? Like it was just like basically the entire flight. He was just preparing for the event, and I think it just speaks so much of like, like how do you get to that level of domination? Just like you're just ready for everything, and of course, I mean both have just such immense talent that Kai's talent preparation is unbeatable. And the thing that they both have in common is they both had incredible teammates, right? And I think that especially when we're talking about the team building part, right? Like the German juggernaut, he had his teammates, and John also.
Dirk Baborowski was at some point the best player in the game.
I think he was probably number 2, but
maybe he was number 2 to Kai, but he was in the conversation, absolutely.
He was definitely in the conversation.
He was absolutely. I mean,
and he has an individual PT win as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And I remember, talking with John of like, oh, how have you done for so long? And he's like, having like the O'Mahony Schwartz brothers there to always be pushing him, encouraging him, and keeping him in check, right? And so just having that, I think, really helped elevate their games as well.
Yeah, I always remember John having this kind of like breakthrough moment where he just kind of like said, I need to surround myself with great players who take the game seriously, and was friends with the OMSs, but then also like pulled in the dead guys and Pakula and those people, and really gave himself an even like more solid foundation, and maybe some of the players he played with when he was a kid who might have been distracting at some points, or even like jealous of some of his success. So that was always very interesting. He wrote one of my favorite tournament reports after he won Pro Tour New York, and it was really just kind of like, yeah, I want to be serious about this, and I want to surround myself with people who respect me. And I remember that so vividly, and it's, you know, and just, he went on a dominating tear. Then he goes away. He just stops playing Magic. And then the Hall of Fame comes around. He gets, obviously, his first ballot, you know, first in his class, not unanimous somehow, but okay. And then goes on to have another Hall of Fame career post Hall of Fame. It's kind of remarkable.
Right. Like when you know, early on you were talking about Nathan, and it's like, to me, that longevity of like, oh, John's had 2 Hall of Fame careers, right? And so it's like, oh, when you're at that point, that's when it's like, okay, yeah, let's talk about Nathan. When it's just, you know, that amount of success over that amount of time, stopping, coming back, it's incredible.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, let's give credit to Kai here, by the way. Yeah. Kai top 8'd the last Pro Tour.
Yeah.
I mean, just insane. Like,
the
that made me so
decade
happy.
in which Kai has top 8 in a Pro Tour.
I like that.
So the first person to me to really get that kind of like John, Kai, and then to add an "and" to that was Paulo Vitor Damarosa, where people were like, oh, wait a minute. And even to the point where people are like, wait, is Paulo better than them? And like, to even ask that question is like, kind of means you're the stuff of legend. Like, so, I mean, you know Paulo probably better than anybody. I've worked with him, but I mean, you played with him and shared a house with him so many times. What is it about Paulo that makes him such an amazing player?
I mean, Paulo was a great player before we started to team together, but Team Channel Fireball really elevated all of us. Like, if you go back to the original 12 people on the roster, 9 of us made the Hall of Fame, and I think that the team has a lot to do with that. And I got to, of course, work with Paulo super closely in that. He was, you know, one of the best people on the team, also just a really close friend. And one of the strengths that he always had that was incredible was he was able to theoretically think about Magic without having to play the games. And I remember it being frustrating to people on the team. We'd be like talking about a sideboard card or whether we want to play like a land in the sideboard or a third duress or whatever. And people would be like, well, I played these games. He's like, yeah, but think about it this. And he like explains in theory, and it's like, no, you're right. Like, it doesn't actually, we don't have to play the game to figure that out, you know. And he was just, he understood Magic so well, still does, that he, obviously practice helped him, just like everyone else, but he did have the ability to kind of not have any preconceptions about what other people thought or what the, you know, kind of accepted knowledge was. He's like, I'm going to figure this out for myself, and he just was able to do that. And he's like, this thing that everyone does doesn't make sense. We should do it a different way. And like, he's improved a ton of our decks as a result, and he has a good sense for picking decks, and that was just a huge part of it. And yeah, I mean, Paulo's like one of the most accomplished players of all time.
Do you have him number 1?
I have number 3.
You still have him 3rd?
Yeah, we can go into my rankings at some point here if you want. But
sorry,
I said if you want to go into my rankings, we could definitely talk about it. But
I mean,
I do have Paulo at number 3. Yeah.
I see the case like when he won the Worlds, the recent one,
just a couple years ago. Yeah.
Right. That for me got him up to that. I definitely think you can make the case if you give him any credit for the extra level of difficulty of living in Brazil, then I think you have to put him at number 1. Right, the access to tournaments, right? John Finkel, Kai Budde, these guys got to go dominate Grand Prix circuits, right? It's so much, I mean, it's not easy to perform the way that they have, but it's easier than it was for Paulo. And I think if you give him any credit for that extra level of difficulty, I think that adds up to, yeah, it's actually like a more impressive series of events over the career for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of it, it's exactly what I told Brian when we were talking before the show. Whatever your criteria are for best players of all time, it's going to be a mix of play skill, peak play skill, results. Like you said, difficulty, like what difficulties he faced in competing, all that stuff goes in. And I think it is totally legitimate to say Paulo's number 1 or number 2, you know, if those are the criteria you use.
Sure.
Yeah. Do you remember how Paulo changed the way we talked about player performances? I remember we were at, what was that, Pro Tour Charlotte, or it was Team Pro Tour. It's Paulo's first top 8. His team finishes, I think, 2nd.
Yeah,
or
think so.
They make top 4 anyway. And it's him and Willie Adel and another player, and we're like talking about, and I'm like, wow, Paulo, I feel like he was writing for a website, you know. And I'm like, and then we just like start looking up some past results of Paulo, and we just realized he had cashed every Pro Tour he had played in, or like 4 out of 5 Pro Tours he had played in before that moment, you know. And it was like, we shouldn't have been surprised by this player. we should have known this guy was coming. And it really changed the way we looked at players. It was, for me, I spent a lot of time writing about players who finished 9th through 16th in Pro Tours for years. And that came from Paulo, making me aware that, people are not always having that top 8 or not always winning in their Pro Tour debut, like you and Jake Beardsley. Not a sentence you thought you'd hear.
I mean, the difference between the top 8 and top 16s, half a win, 1 win. It's like it's such a
sometimes
small.
0 wins.
Sometimes 0 wins, right? Sometimes it's just tiebreakers, and so. But like the top 8, of course, that gets the focus. That you have the chance to win it all. Where at top 16, you go home and you're like, oh, what could I have done a little bit better, right? If I just drawn one, a land right then, I could have been the champion. But that's how it goes.
Let's talk about a player you
Sorry,
know.
I don't want to let him off the hook completely.
Oh yeah,
you have Paulo third. Is it John first?
John first.
John first.
Oh.
Okay.
Let's
We're
talk
gonna
about
get the record set.
Got a little applause from John's mom out there in the audience. Gabriel Nassif, someone who is still thriving. I think still he's still literally at the top tables of world right now. Could win Player of the Year this year still, right? Is it fair to put Gabriel Nassif in that top 5? Certainly feel like at times we would talk about him in that 3rd position or before Paulo kind of emerged.
It would be a travesty not to put him in the top 5.
Yeah, top 5. Top 5
it would be a travesty not to have him in the top 5.
Right.
I think that, I don't know what criteria you're using, but not having him in the top 5, I would have a real problem with that list.
I also remember we used to have this conversation, the conversation about who's the best player in the game right now. And in the 2000s, after Kai sort of fades away a little bit when Magic Online comes out, and it's like, oh, is it Masashi Oiso? Is it Kenji? There was this string of people, and then 5 years of that, I'm like, wait, has it just been Nassif the whole time? It's just been he was always floating around 2nd in the Player of the Year race, a couple of top 8s, and that was 20 years ago, and he's still over there putting up top 8s.
One of the epic Pro Tour matches that I've ever gotten to cover is you and Nassif playing. How many times have you replayed that match in your head, Luis?
I mean, at one point, me and Marshall went and redid coverage of that match. It was the finals of Kyoto, and it was just one of the biggest matches I've ever played, one of the wildest matches I've ever played. I still think about it. I mean, obviously at this point, I'm pretty happy with how everything has played out. Would have been nice to beat Nassif in that game, though.
So I got to put you on the spot, Luis, as we talk about the best players of all time. Do you have yourself in that list? I mean, we certainly have all put you in that place at various times. I mean, but do you look at your career and say, I'm a top 5 Magic player?
Yeah, I think I am. I mean, I have John number 1, Kai number 2, Paula number 3, myself number 4, Nassif number 5. I get to do that. It's my list. I wouldn't argue with you if you had it in a different order, but if you had a drastically different top 5, then yeah, we could have a discussion. But I think that, I don't know. I think my peak play skill and my accomplishments can make it a good argument.
That's the right top 5 for me also.
Yeah. And coincidentally, that's what we have art for. So
the sunglasses should move you up on the list alone. Yeah. I mean, those are pretty fantastic.
Yeah. So I wanted to use our remainder of our time to just ask each of the panelists to share a great memory they have from either covering the Pro Tour, playing on the Pro Tour, or watching the Pro Tour. Mike, I love your story. If you could share it with people.
Yeah, absolutely. So Magic was on ESPN, or a lot of times ESPN2.
The Deuce.
Yes, indeed. So for me, what it was sort of like a recap show of the Pro Tour, right? Post-produced, really awesome for its time. And so myself, Gary Wise, and Scott Johns had teamed up for Team Potato Nation, right, for the Pro Tour. And so it's Team Pro Tour. We do fantastic. It's in New York, and as we've been showing off in some of those clips, that when you win, which we did win, you get a giant check and some trophies, right? So it's a team event. We get one giant check. We get 3 trophies, and it's being broadcast on the ESPN. And you can go back, and if you want, this is on YouTube. You can. It was probably Potato Nation Pro Tour, and so it's Gary Wise on one side, I'm in the middle, Scott's on the other side, and it's like the end, and it's like that we're holding the check in front of us, and Gary raises his trophy, Scott raises his trophy. I go to raise my trophy, but like the check's right there. And so like on ESPN at the very end of this video, you see me just like bonking myself with the trophy. It's like the basically the pinnacle of my Magic career, and I've accomplished so much. And like what is captured for all of time on ESPN, right? And so and then it like cuts to. That's the end of the show. So that to me, it really encapsulates a lot of joy in that particular memory.
Luis, when you look at your career and you look at all that you've accomplished, what's a story that stands out for you, or a memory that you really hold dear?
So this doesn't actually involve me, but this is actually in Barcelona. The week before the Pro Tour in Madrid, there was a Grand Prix in Barcelona, and Anton Jansson's playing, member of the Hall of Fame. And his opponent goes, "Oh, how did you qualify for the Pro Tour?" And Anton's like, "Oh, I'm in the Hall of Fame." The guy's like, "No, you're not." And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "No, but really, how'd you qualify?" He's like, I'm in the Hall of Fame." And he's like, "No, there was only one Hall of Famer in our draft. It was Sam Black." And he's like, "Well, Sam's not in the Hall of Fame." He's like, "Yes, he is." So every time I see Anton, even in my tournament report, I put Anton Janssen is in the Hall of Fame, and like I'll tease him about that because I found that to be pretty funny. Like, Hall of Fame is a lifetime achievement award, but maybe not everyone's like completely plugged into that, and his opponent certainly wasn't having it.
That actually makes me think. So when Magic had pro teams for a while, Maria and I, Good Luck High Five, actually ended up sponsoring like a very oddball little pro team that Craig Wesco put together. And this was before Kai really came back and was being super competitive in the game, but he had his Hall of Fame invite, and so Craig was like, "Oh, Kai's going to be on the team." And I forget, there was one other person, and there was Dirk Babarowski. And Maria and I were like, "Who's Dirk Babarowski?" And we had right to the point where we had jackets with people's names printed on the back of them. And the whole time we were like, who is this 4th random member of our team? And finally one day we asked Craig when we see him at an event, and he's like, "Dirk Babarowski is a member of the Hall of Fame." And we were like, "Oh, okay."
Got a couple of Pro Tour trophies.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
He's won some Pro Tours.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but after that, my new favorite moment is when Mike hit himself with the trophy.
That's great. Yeah, for me, it's almost like I had these two different careers. I don't know which one to pull from. Like, commentary-wise...
You've got 7 minutes. You can pull from both.
All right. I mean, commentary-wise, it's awesome when you see the play coming, right, and are able to set it up and have some time to set it up. And then sometimes you get the players who also sort of see it coming and ham it up. Nassif was actually, you want to talk about more credit for him. He's so good in front of the camera, right? The Ignite Memories against Chapin, where they're hamming that up for the camera, and he's got his hand to his ear because he can hear the crowd coming, right? And the presence of mind for him during his upkeep to put his mana into the form of a Cruel Ultimatum, the exact card he needed to top deck to win his match, and then the Cruel Ultimatum off the charts. But
called shot, right? I mean, that's
absolutely
that's the Babe Ruth calling his shot.
And he says out loud, if you go back and watch it, "This is my Cruel Ultimatum mana." And then he draws it, and I can see from I'm doing the commentary, I can see on the camera that he's actually got the card. He doesn't windmill slam it. He takes a beat to make sure I was right, that this is what yeah, absolutely. And it's just so good. But I mean, the Lightning Helix is where it all really truly came together. That Lightning Helix call, I saw the play coming. It's Mike Flores in the booth with me who's arguing against me. So we get to go through the logic at the same time Craig's going through the logic, and we're just in his head. And we can see exactly what he's thinking about. And it's like, oh, maybe I play for the game to go long. It's like, no, my only chance is to just top deck a burn spell. And then Craig also, his opponent, Olivier Ruel, knows that it's coming, has gone through the logic too. And once Craig burns him end step, he knows he's just playing for the top deck. So Olivier's the one who says, just slam it. And Craig does the windmill slam face up in the middle of the table. And yeah, no, I'm really proud of that call. That was That was sort of everything I try to do to make the game exciting all came together in that moment.
I posted a picture of you and I on Twitter this morning. You know, just like we were walking over here, and I was like, oh, you know, getting the band back together, and then just like there's just like 8 million, you know, replies that are all just like, oh my God, it's Lightning Helix.
Nice.
And I'm like, I wasn't there for that one. that one wasn't me. That was not me. So, but that was a great.
Thanks. That was fun. I still think about that. I mean, playing wise, I think I might be the only person who won the Pro Tour without knowing they were winning the Pro Tour. Like the way my last game of the Pro Tour win plays out, like my opponent plays a Dwarven Miner, which is this creature that like eats all of your non-basic lands, right? And so I have a Drain Life in my hand, and I'm like, I could Drain Life the Dwarven Miner, but to do that, I have to play, oh God, the land that sacrifices swamps I have to blow up all of my own lands to make the mana. Lake of the Dead, thank you. I'm getting old, I apologize.
John's mom really knows the cards.
Absolutely. So I have to like Lake of the Dead, sacrifice all my lands to try to kill this Dwarven Miner. But then if he's got the Force of Will that I assume he must have, he's just going to untap, you know, mine away the Lake of the Dead, and then I'm out of the game. So I play this whole game, I'm like, I don't want to just play into this Force of Will. I'll let the Dwarven Miner, and I'll just attack with these Pump Knights, stack with these Pump Knights. And my opponent takes damage going down to 4, and I'm like, I mean, well, I may as well go for the Lake of the Dead now, right? He's clearly setting up to just fireball me to death on his next turn. That's why he didn't chump block. Like now he's got lethal in the crackback. I guess I'll just go through the motions. I'll Lake of the Dead him. He'll show me the Force of Will. I'm literally thinking about sideboarding in cards to kill Dwarven Miner. I'm thinking about how to sideboard for game 5. And so I do go through the motions with the Lake of the Dead map, and he's like, that works? Just stammers, couldn't believe that he was losing this game that we both thought he'd won. I'm like, what? Yeah, won the Pro Tour just going through the motions on a play that I thought had no chance of working.
And then as a result of you doing that, Aaron Forsyth ends up working at Wizards of the Coast.
Mike Turian lines up working there.
Right? Like,
well, but the way
Aaron's story is great. You're right.
The way Aaron tells the story is, you know, Randy wins the Pro Tour playing his first Pro Tour, and people are writing, and Aaron's like, I've played with that guy.
That guy won a Pro Tour?
Yeah. Maybe I should try to get on the Pro Tour. And so, launched a lot of careers.
100% true story. I mean, a lot of the Pittsburgh guys have had a pretty big influence on Magic, which is awesome. But yeah, when I moved to Pittsburgh, I was like trying to find the good Magic players. Like I was a PTQ level player, and eventually found the good Magic players. I found Eric Lauer, and eventually Mike Turian, and so we sort of were playing at Carnegie Mellon, which is just like a half a mile up the street from University of Pittsburgh. Well, I had gone to the Pittsburgh Student Union to just see what the Magic scene was like there, and it's all just like multiplayer free-for-all players. Like this, it's fine. That's great that these guys are enjoying Magic, but not quite the competitive scene I'm looking for. Aaron was one of those multiplayer free-for-all guys. Like he had played a game or two, knew who I was, and it's like that guy won a Pro Tour. Yeah, started taking it more seriously. Came up to see him Unit Test with us, and now he just runs the game.
I think my favorite Pro Tour moment is probably like your Lightning Helix is my Martin Mueller cursing, dropping 3 F-bombs in the middle of an interview with me, and my eyes just like, I have no idea what's going to happen. No one has ever really cursed on the Pro Tour stream before. Everyone was terrified when I joined the coverage team that I would just curse all the time. In fact, I'm still owed 1 curse word.
Oh, you haven't used it yet?
I've never used my 1 curse word.
You got 2 minutes.
I've got 2 minutes. And so, yeah, I love that story. But I think one of my favorite coverage moments is when we're at Worlds, and it's like the whole crazy play, and we get like the camera jib going up over to watch the ruling, and which just makes me think of Sheldon Menery, who's not here with us this week, who's the head judge for that event, and I just wanted to see if anybody in these closing minutes had a thought or a story about Sheldon, about him as a judge and a force for just making it better. I did an interview with him, Luis, and he singled you out as someone who wanted the game to be a better place and helped him in his mission to do that.
I mean, when I first started playing, we talked about PT Charleston. That was one of my first Pro Tours also. There were a lot of people who were cheating. Like there were a lot of, and it was always a crapshoot what the judge would or wouldn't do when you called them. There was this like blanket of security when Sheldon was the head judge, because he would come over and he would deal with it, and he actually made it feel like you could compete in a fair game of Magic, which was not always the case. And that, I mean, he made a huge impact, and that part of the reason that I played competitive Magic was I didn't go there and get cheated a bunch at my first couple Pro Tours. I went there and I felt like the judges would actually deal with it appropriately, and they did.
Awesome. So, yeah, I'm going to be doing a panel tomorrow where I had a chance to talk to Sheldon a couple weeks ago, and we're going to play that. So I hope people will show up for that. And in the light of what we're talking about, I'm going to use my one curse word right now, and I'm going to say, fuck cancer. So I hope I get invited back to another one of these, but I think it'll be okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming out today. Thank you to the panelists, Mike Turian, Luis Scott-Vargas, Meghan Wolff, Randy Buehler. I was your host, Brian David Marshall. Thanks. Stay tuned for more great stuff all day today.